On this episode of Skeptical Prepper, we're going to talk about The Walking Dead. I recently started seeing The Walking Dead again for this purpose, and I really like the show. I haven't really kept up with the show, but maybe this would be an opportunity to basically continue watching the show where I left off. But I really liked the show when I was able to watch it on the TV and everything. But once I moved out here, the whole process of Wi-Fi and getting internet out here on my property has been a little difficult. So I haven't really kept up with it after that. But we're going to dive into The Walking Dead on stuff that I noticed. And we're going to take off from like season 1 and we're going to move on forward. And Skeptical Prepper, it's about prepare, survive, but let's be honest, you'll probably die. It has to do something with like a little bit of like, comic relief, I guess you could call it. I don't want to be too serious on a lot of stuff. I want to have a little fun with it, even though some stuff can be a little serious. But like I said, we're going to start viewing The Walking Dead and talking about The Walking Dead. And so we're going to dive into that on stuff that I noticed that just was like, what? That I didn't really understand in The Walking Dead and it just didn't make sense or it wasn't real. So we're going to start off with, season 1. I call it Atlanta. And then, we're going to go with episode 1 on this video. And like I said, I had to like sit down and watch the show and actually write notes on stuff that I saw. So we're going to dive into what I saw. And the way I'm going to start off of it is just like, I'm just going to start naming like the time where I saw it, like the minute, and then what I saw. So in, 17 minutes into the first episode, this already shows Rick, kill the first zombie, which is a little girl. And then it goes back in time to where like he's a police officer and then he gets shot and then he ends up in a coma. But I'm no doctor, so I don't really know a lot of stuff about like the coma and all this stuff, but I have seen a couple of people before mention about like if he was in a coma, like he would have like basically shitted himself in that time span, which like they left him alone when basically the virus was happening until when he woke up. Like I said, I'm no doctor, so I don't know how that would work out, but that's what they say. But one thing I noticed around 17 minutes in the first episode of The Walking Dead is in the hospital, the lights are flickering. And from what I understand in the episode is that pretty much the grid is down. Like there is no electric or gas or utilities and stuff like that going around. So my question is, why are the lights in the hospital flickering? Like that's what I didn't understand. Like if the grid is supposed to be down, as they mention it a little bit later on in the episode, it's kind of like, wait, why is there lights on if the grid should be down? Now I understand maybe the hospital might have a generator or something like that, but then again, it's kind of like if the generator should be running, how long would it run on, the fossil fuels, the gasoline, the diesel, or whatever it was running off of. But that's one thing I noticed is like there's lights flickering and then, there should be no grid. And then 17 minutes in, like 2 minutes right after that I noticed that, Rick somehow stumbles upon a desk and he's looking for like stuff or something and he finds matches. Now I remember there was a time where they would give matches at the gas station. You would buy like a pack of cigarettes or something like that and you would ask for matches and they would give you matches. Recently, like maybe like a few years ago, I've asked for matches before and they said that they didn't carry matches anymore. Now I'm not sure if that's just that particular gas station that I went to didn't have matches, but that's one thing I've always known that before, like you would be able to get matches at the gas station and they were completely free. But recently I have not seen anybody with matches. Now that I'm talking about this, that I'm like, there used to be matches, I haven't seen anybody with matches. I know you could go to like a big box store or whatever and buy like a box of like wooden matches, but I'm talking about like the gas station matches that come like 20 little paper cardboard matchsticks in like a little carton in a little card, and then you could just, it has a striker and everything, and you would use that. Um, so I might have to like go to like a gas station and ask for matches to see if they have any matches. But I remember there was a time like there was matches and you were able to get matches. And as kids growing up, we had bikes, we had bicycles. In that time, there was no Wi-Fi, there was no cell phones, there was none of that. And I remember me and the neighborhood kids and my family, my cousins and all that stuff, we would have bicycles. And one thing about bicycles and they roaming around the neighborhood and all that stuff, you always get a flat tire some way in a time or another. So what my dad would do, my dad would go to like a hardware store. It was kind of like an Ace, but it wasn't really like an Ace. But he would buy us like packs of basically patches for the bicycle. Now, when we were kids, when we would drive our bikes and we would get a flat tire, we would go to the gas station and ask for matches. I remember back in the day, they would be like, no, we can't give you guys kids matches, but then we would be like, no, it's to fix our bikes. And I'm pretty sure that was common because once we would say that, like, it's to fix our bikes, they would give us matches. And the whole thing would be like, you would get a flat tire, you would undo your tire, you would get the tube, you would find where the tube was leaking air, and then the whole kit of the repair kit would have like a little hand sander, and you would sand where you would have like the hole, and then you would put glue on it, and then with the matches you would light it, and you would let it burn for about like 10 seconds, and then you would blow on it, turn it off, and then you would get a patch and put it on there. You would hold it, and that patch would create the seal, and you would put air in your bike and your tire once again. And so as kids, we always carried like those kits and just a handful of match packets that we would get at the gas station. Like, that wasn't uncommon. But now that I notice stuff that like, wow, you don't really get matches at gas stations anymore. So I'm not sure if you can still get matches at the gas station, but that's something I noticed on that episode where like he somehow has matches. He found matches. So maybe in that part of the world, in that part of the country, like in Georgia and stuff like that, maybe matches is a little more common than it is out here. Now, so after Rick comes out of the hospital, it's about like 22 minutes in. Rick passes through like a military compound, little station to have outside the hospital, and there's like loads of like body bags outside, and he doesn't know this because in the show they make it seem like he has no idea what's going on. But something like that would be something that shouldn't be overlooked. Like, if Rick had known like this was going on, like I'm sure he would have spent a little more time cautiously into that little military aid station, because you can find, rifles that maybe are left on dead soldiers, magazines, medical kits, MREs, any type of supplies. If there's a couple of Humvees and a helicopter, I'm sure there could have been some heavy firepower on those vehicles. But like, that's one thing I noticed. Rick passes through a military like aid station, like right outside the hospital, and that would be something like, oh, maybe that's something they should look at. And I know like in season, if I remember correctly, season 3 or 4, Rick goes back to his hometown, and then he finds Morgan, and Morgan has all these guns and everything. Maybe Morgan might have got it from that place. Also, like, it's known that he basically like takes out a bunch of people that are pretty much roaming into town and takes away their supplies and guns and all that stuff. But maybe like a big majority of the guns that Morgan got in that episode could have been from that military compound right outside the hospital. But that's something I noticed on when Rick passes that, they're like, hey, there could be like supplies and ammo right there. Um, Another thing I noticed, like as Rick's walking like from the hospital to basically his house, he grabs a bike and all this stuff. I noticed in the background like there's no block walls. Like that's something that came to my mind when I was like, huh, how come there's no block walls like in the neighborhood? I know where I'm from, it's not uncommon for people to basically put block walls on their property, on the perimeter. Um, in the neighborhood, yeah, you can have like a chain link fence, a picket fence, but it's like chain link fence, picket fence, block wall, and from like the two in basically in my area, like it's more common for somebody to put a block wall. I know at the beginning, like when someone buys a house or something like that, they eventually just like, or the house comes with like a picket fence or a chain link fence. A lot of times people tend to basically just go and put a block wall. Now, a lot of this has to do with like privacy, security, and stuff like that. But like if you're talking about like maybe like you're running away from like maybe 10 zombies, 20 zombies, something like that, and you basically get inside a perimeter where there's a block wall, it would be very difficult for like that amount of zombies to basically break down a block wall. Even sometimes like if there's like a car crash or something and hits a block wall, you might be able to knock out maybe in between like the two pillars, or maybe like knock out one pillar and a little bit around it. But like if you have the ability to fix it, you can fix it right away. Maybe a couple of days, and it's back to basically brand new. And it really holds that level of like security and protection, especially if you're talking about like zombies. But like that's one thing I've noticed in like the show in general. Like there is no block walls. Maybe as I rewatch the show and start doing this, I might notice, hey, look, hey, there's a block wall. I'll get excited for that. But like, that's one thing I've noticed, like as this season, that there's no block walls, and block walls initially now in the economy and everything, like would bring up your property value, but in the show itself, like no block walls. I haven't thought about how come they don't know how to basically like build block walls. I know that in like I forget what season it is in, but like in season like way up ahead, like when they're like at Hilltop and stuff like that, like they start like milling wood and start basically like building bridges and like all these old school like basically like technology. One thing I notice is like they don't do blocks. And I know maybe because of the area, the humidity, the salt in the air, and all that stuff, blocks may not be as good. But like a lot of the buildings in that area are clay bricks. Now, clay bricks are made out of clay, like the dirt. So like if you're able to like finely refine clay dirt, and like that red dirt that they show like all up in the show, like Georgia and stuff like that, like they could easily make a bunch of clay bricks. Um, Now it wouldn't be if somebody's here watching us, like an engineer or something like that, and they're actually here and they notice what I'm saying is like, well, it wouldn't be an actual like brick. No, I understand it wouldn't be an actual brick, but then it would be like a self-made brick where they can easily like somehow find lime. Maybe they'll go to like a huge like material place and find like mortar bags and everything, sand, and they'll be able to build block walls easily. Um, because even if like even if they opted out into just like we're gonna mill all this wood, we're gonna use all these old materials, like you got to think about anywhere around the world, there's always new buildings being built. So even in like a city or something like that, like in outskirts of a town, close by to the city, there has to be a material manufacturer's place. Like in town of Tucson, there's like a handful of like block making facilities because block out here is not uncommon. So if their buildings are mostly made out of red brick, there's probably facilities that have just a bunch of red bricks already like made. And throughout the time that happens during The Walking Dead, like the weather wouldn't really affect those bricks. So that's one thing that like caught my eye. We're like, hey, there's no block walls, but there's always this ability of like finding a facility where they already have like thousands and thousands of blocks made, where it would be heavy to basically move. But if they find a building like that where like there's a forklift and there's propane still left around, and a couple of trucks, they might be able to load those trucks up and move into an area and build very heavy block walls. But yeah, block walls, that's something I noticed, but we're gonna move on from there just because maybe I might notice some block walls in the season and future seasons, stuff like that. But we're gonna do that. One thing I did see that was pretty funny was, after Rick basically encounters Morgan, or Morgan encounters Rick, and they're inside the house, inside the house of that, Morgan has a bunch of blankets just covered around the windows. And my thought when I was watching, I was like, oh yeah, that's pretty clever, block the light, block everything. But I'm just like, did Morgan go like to house and just jack a bunch of blankets to cover that? Because there's no way he could have carried all those blankets with him. Even if he had a car, like, that's a lot of blankets. So that's a very good idea. Like if somehow you're in a place where you're hunkering down and you need to like cover the light. Now right after those blankets, I did notice another thing was like they're in a house and they have all these candles lit up, and I'm thinking to myself like, if you guys are like, hey yeah, the world's gonna end, there's zombies, the dead and stuff like that. They have all these candles lit up, and I'm just like, yo, that's just a waste of candles. Like you don't really need all those candles lighting up the house, especially if you're trying to block any light coming out of the window. And you might notice I have a blanket here on the window too, and so that's kind of like the same thing. But one thing I found really funny was like they turn off all the candles when they hear the car noise, the car alarm go off, and they turn off all the candles. But then there's that one lamp in the background that's basically like lighting up the whole house. And I'm thinking to myself, well, why do you have the candles on if that lamp basically does that? And another thing is I'm just like, where can I get that lamp? Because I need that lamp. If that lamp was like, had the ability to light up the whole house, then why am I basically wasting time trying to like light up a bunch of little lamps or like flashlights and stuff like that when my power goes out? So that was one thing. I was like, yo, that lamp is legit. I need to get that. But then again, it's probably just, just a bunch of like movie stuff, entertainment stuff. Like that lamp probably doesn't exist. And if it does, let me know. Put it on the comments below, because that lamp looks pretty legit. And then right there, when they're also just doing the stuff like, they turn off the candles because of the car alarm and all stuff. Like I noticed that in that span of time, it's like 36 minutes in, they're basically sleeping in the living room, like right in front of the main door. And it's a 2-story house, so I'm thinking to myself, why don't they just go upstairs and like hunker down upstairs instead of sleeping right in front of the door? Like I just felt that was kind of like unnecessary. That they were just like right in front of the door with like zombies outside, and Morgan knows that every time like there's the car noise, and he took that shot, so there's more zombies outside, but yet they're still sleeping on the first floor, right in front of the door, right in front of the main door. So I found that kind of odd, like like just go upstairs, but. And then so then it's the next day. And I feel like this scene is a little more real because this is when Rick finally takes out his first zombie and he hits it with a bat. And Rick asks the question like, "Are you sure they're dead?" And they're like, "Yeah, no, they're dead." And it seems that Rick is going all out swinging, but he still has that like sense of holding a little bit back because he's still not 100% sure that they're dead. But then, right after like he basically eliminates the zombie, he tells Morgan that he needs a minute to like I guess like breathe, relocate his thoughts and stuff like that. So I feel that was like a little real because at something like that when it's like your first time actually like handling that would be very difficult. And just the sense of like Rick's just got out of the coma, he has stitches, he's not really on himself, he's tired, there's a lot of stress going on, and then he's kind of going at it pretty hard, and then he gets tired. I feel like that is like very real. And even myself, if I had to take out a zombie with like a baseball bat going like full swing, I think it would take a couple of swings just like Rick did. It wouldn't be like a one swing thing. Especially, I'm used to like chopping wood, cutting trees down and stuff like that with axes, cutting roots. I'm used to swinging an axe most of the time, and I know that like you can get good and you can get like steady and you can have a good sense of like I can axe or swing a couple hours a day at a pace, and you'll get tired at the end of the day, but you'll basically complete the day just swinging away. Now compared to as I first started doing that, it would be tiresome, so I get that. Like when Rick is swinging his bat to the zombie, he got tired. So I get that. So I know some people might be like, "Oh, I could have done that easily." And it's just like, no, you can't, because you're not a professional baseball player, and I'm not a professional baseball player. But I actually swung a lot more than most people. So I know that at the beginning stages of actually like swinging stuff is tiresome. So that's something that caught my attention. I was like, "Oh yeah, that's pretty real," and I wanted to bring it up. Now, so right after that, right, this is the funny thing. Right after that, like they take out a zombie, they go to Rick's house, and them being knowledgeable, like, "Hey, there was a bunch of zombies here last night, and there was a zombie outside the house." Yet they go inside the house, they leave the door wide open, and Dwayne is standing right in front of the door, and they're just talking normally. Like, who knows? Maybe a zombie could have heard them talking and could have started walking their way. But then Dwayne is right, or is his name Dwayne or Wayne? So I think it's Dwayne. Dwayne is right there in front of the door, and they're just talking like if zombies escaped their mind, like out of reality. So I thought that was like, "Yo, what's wrong with you? Like, what's going on with that?" So I thought that was kind of like pretty funny. It's like, "Yo, like seriously?" Like at this point in the game, you guys are like, "Yeah, there's zombies," like. But then Dwayne is right there, door wide open, and they're not doing anything like to take precaution on that. So, and they eventually get to the police station, and at this point, Morgan tells they're gonna take a shower. And Morgan tells Rick like, the gas been down for a while, the utilities been down for a while, and then Rick says the station has its own propane system, and then they get hot water, and then he mentions the pilot is still on. So I'm gonna break that down a bit. So it might be different, in that area, but in my area over here on the West Coast, on the West, it's basically like in the monsoons when the electricity goes out, basically like the grid goes down, and it goes down maybe for a couple hours, a day. A day is a little too much, but it goes out for a couple hours just because strong winds, thunderstorms, a falling tree hits a power line and stuff like that. And the thing is, when the electricity goes out and something like that, we notice right away a drop in pressure in water. Like in houses, you don't have water unless you have electricity, because the electricity is making sure that there's actual like pumps, like huge pumps, making sure that there's enough pressure in all the houses. So when the electricity goes out, there is basically like a limited supply of water because there's only so much pressure uh, basically stabilized in the pipes. So in this scene, if the grid was down, there wouldn't be water pressure. So that's kind of something that I noticed. I'm like, yo, like if the grid's down, why is there water pressure? Now I understand they got their own propane system, so if the gas is out, you know, you got propane. But another thing is like they said the pilot is on, so I'm not sure how big their system is on tanks and stuff like that. But the way like a boiler works, like a city boiler works, and it's basically you got a tank, it's insulated, an outer shell, and then on the inside at the bottom, you basically got a pilot. It's a little flame, and then inside the tank, there is like a thermometer sensor. So basically, when the temperature of your water drops, it sends a signal to basically turn on more gas, and then the pilot lights up that gas and it brings it up to the temperature required that you set it for your boiler. And once it reaches that temperature, that gas turns off, but the pilot's still on. Now, I remember when I was buying my property, they had a propane tank outside. It's a 500-gallon one, and one thing I noticed is that my boiler is pretty shitty. So I noticed that like a month and a month and a half, like a 500-gallon tank of gas would waste, just because the whole concept of temperature went low, heated up, temperature went low, heated up, temperature went low, heated up. Like it's just a constant turning on and turning off, turning on and turning off. One thing I'm moving into is I have everything off, so it's not really like I'm wasting gas or anything. But one thing I'm moving into is an on-demand heater. So basically, when water runs through the system, it'll let the system know to turn on the gas, and the way it turns on the gas with an electrical current. So there's not a pilot running on at all times. So it's basically water runs, the whole system will turn on, and it'll heat up the water, and then you got hot water, and then once basically it reaches temperature, it turns off, and then it keeps turning on and off the whole time that you're running water. But then once there's no more running water, it senses that there's no running water, so it'll just turn off completely until you turn it back on. So that's a system I'm thinking of moving on. But going back to The Walking Dead here is yeah, like if somehow at this point it's been like 2-3 months since the whole zombie apocalypse had started, depending on how big their system is, they probably got really lucky that they had hot water. Even setting aside the concept of, hey, somehow they have a pressurized water tank, as well, because that's another thing is something like that where like if you have your own propane system, your own, on-demand water heater, and then maybe like a little solar panel that would basically power up the ignition of the on-demand water, and then basically you can set up the building with gutters and a water tank, and then also with the solar panel hook up like 35 psi, on demand, water pressure, where as water runs through, it'll turn on again, and it'll keep pumping pressure. So you can have a multitude of a system where like you really don't require to be on grid and stuff like that, and have like hot waters and hot showers. So, going back to The Walking Dead here is like, okay, let's benefit of the doubt, somehow there is still enough pressure in the system where they're able to have showers, and somehow, you know, they had a big enough tank or couple of tanks that had the pilot going, and they had enough to basically have hot water and take a shower. But in reality, no electricity, no water, because you'll lose pressure right away. Unless you basically have something like I just mentioned, like a system like that, or a well or something like that. And then if you have a propane tank and you got like a uh, city boiler where like it constantly turns on and off to keep that temperature at that level, then you might not be able to have gas at that time. So, oh, and then so then they take a shower, they do all that stuff, and then he gives them a rifle, gives them some rounds, and then Rick leaves for Atlanta, and then so it goes back to basically like one of the last scenes where Morgan is shooting on the second floor to some zombies. Now, the way I see it is Morgan's like there's like a street and maybe like a house away from where he's shooting at, and then he has a scope, and in reality I feel like you wouldn't really need to have a scope for those range of shots. Now, especially like if that's like a police officer's like rifle and it's supposed to have a scope. I have no idea what the scope is. I didn't really look into it. But if it's like a sniper rifle for like the police officers and stuff like that, I'm pretty sure they would have like a pretty big scope on it, where like the way they showed like Morgan looking into that zombie's head and the way it sized it up, I feel like that's a little inaccurate. I feel like it would have been a lot more closer. But it's all movie stuff. But like I said, like me seeing that scene at the distance, you really wouldn't need a scope for those shots if you had iron sights. And I understand when you're shooting like 100 yards, 300 yards, like a 6-inch target, like a little 6-inch target, can become a little difficult, but it can be done. And I do know that in like season 2, they do the same thing where like they mess up where I think Andrea's like shooting at Daryl and she's like fucking far, and yet she's aiming at Daryl's head with like a scope, but she's able to see like basically like his torso and head in that scope. So imagine like, hey, if they had basically the same rifle, same scopes, how come Morgan's rifle at season 1 didn't like zoom in into that zombie's eye? So that's something to consider. And plus, in season 2, I'll get into that. Andrea shoots Daryl like in the head and she misses, but in reality, like if she would have actually taken that shot like that, that shot would have basically hit like, I don't know, 15, 20 feet below Daryl's legs. But anyways, so I feel like in that scene, Morgan didn't need a scope, and if it was like a police officer scope, it was totally wrong. And talking about like 100, 300 yards, shots are possible. I've heard, in the hunters community, it's kind of like, oh yeah, I took this shot at 500 yards, 600 yards, and I'm like, I don't even want to go more than 200 yards, and there's people taking like 600-yard shots. So, it does take practice to get into like shots like that, but I feel like in this scene, he didn't need a scope for that distance. However, that rifle didn't have iron sights, so he had the scope. But I feel like the whole thing of like the show is they really messed up on a couple of things on firearms. So that's it. So we'll wrap up. Episode 1 like that, on things I noticed and stuff I saw and my thoughts on like basically the first episode of season 1 of The Walking Dead. And like a lot of times it's kind of like, The Walking Dead was a pretty good show. Like I said, I haven't finished it. I haven't continued watching it, which I'm gonna start doing again. Basically to have a fresh memory and basically move on. After I do season 1 here, I'll move on to season 2 and we'll go like that. Um, but some stuff I noticed in the show and I'm just like that's not real. And I think it's pretty funny. One thing I'm gonna mention a lot in like maybe like the first season of stuff I see of like firearms and stuff. One thing they do a lot is like a hammer clicking noise on basically like Glocks, and Glocks don't have exterior hammers to basically do that. So it's pretty funny how like in a lot of like media, TV shows and stuff like that, they basically overlook actual like reality of firearms and rifles and pistols and stuff like that. That they just add a clicking hammer noise to everything. It's just like no, it's not like that. And then one thing I do notice a lot, like in movies, is they pump a shotgun quite a bit. Like they'll pump a shotgun before they go into like the mission or something, and then right when they're at the mission, they'll pump the shotgun again, and then and then once they got like I don't know a person like hostage or something, they'll pump the shotgun again, and then the shotguns end up shooting like 30 rounds without them reloading. And it's kind of like yo, you already wasted 3 rounds in the beginning or 2 rounds if you loaded it the first time, and then you pumped it twice again. Like you already lost 2 rounds, and then you have, basically 3 rounds left in the inner magazine of a shotgun. So it's kind of like there's a lot of stuff they do that's just like it doesn't make sense, and I feel like it's pretty funny. So yeah, so we'll wrap it up here, and we'll continue on episode 2 in next week. So skeptical prepper out. Prepare to survive, but let's be honest, you'll probably die.